Okay, let's unpack this. If you were to ask most people, what comes to mind when they think about Islam in a historical context, especially its relationship with other faiths,
Right.
the answer you get is almost always dominated by conflict, by conquest, or, at a minimum, some kind of theological tension.
That association, which gets reinforced by the noise of current events, it's deeply incomplete. The discussions around war and violence and nonviolence,
Mhm.
they've been central to Islamic scholarship for centuries.
Right.
The concept we hear most often, jihad, is a huge umbrella term. And the perspectives on how Muslims should relate to non-Muslims, they span this profound spectrum.
From what to what?
From political intolerance on one side, all the way to a real commitment to a kind of profound pacifism and enduring tolerance on the other.
And that's our focus for this deep dive, finding the roots of that tolerant tradition. We're looking at a powerful historical blueprint for peaceful coexistence that flourished in West Africa.
The Sawarian tradition.
Exactly, named after the hugely influential scholar and jurist Al-Hajj Salim Swari. Our mission here is to understand how this figure created a theological license for nonviolence that really still shapes entire countries today.
And it's so important to set the geographical stage here. West Africa, we're talking Senegal, the Gambia, Mali, it has this ancient, deep history with Islam.
But the situation was unique.
Very unique. For centuries, you had a growing Muslim population that often found itself living alongside or even under the leadership of non-Muslim rulers. The historical sources sometimes call them pagan inhabitants.
And that context just creates an immediate legal dilemma, right? If you're a devout Muslim, what are the pressing questions that land on your desk if you're a scholar like Swari?
Oh, they're existential questions. How do you ethically conduct business and trade with non-Muslims? Is it theologically acceptable to live under their government, or do you have an obligation to overthrow it?
And the big one.
And the big one, crucial for this deep dive, is armed jihad is war obligatory for missionary work or for establishing Islamic political rule? Swari's life work was to give a definitive, a cohesive, and an enduring answer to these communities grappling with these very real pressures.
So let's introduce the man himself, Al-Hajj Salim Swari. He was a Muslim cleric, a jurist of the Sinqa people in what is today Mali. What gave him the authority, the sheer weight to found an entire movement?
His authority, I think, really rested on two pillars: immense scholarship and an almost unbelievable piety.
Let's start with the piety. The first thing you notice is his title, Al-Hajj.
Right, which marks him as someone who completed the pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj.
And here is where it gets really interesting. The sources say he performed that Hajj 7 times.
7.
That's just staggering. We have to pause on that because traveling from West Africa, from Mali to Mecca in the Middle Ages, that wasn't just a difficult trip. It was a multi-year, life-threatening ordeal.
Exactly. We're talking about walking or riding camels for thousands of miles,
Yeah.
crossing deserts, navigating different political zones, dealing with bandits, surviving these extreme climate shifts.
Doing it once was the achievement of a lifetime. It would earn you immense respect.
To do it 7 times is a spiritual feat. It's almost unheard of in Islamic history.
It's not just travel. It's a commitment of decades of his life to this spiritual duty. This wasn't tourism. This was a public, sustained demonstration of faith that gave him this unshakable moral and religious capital.
Absolutely. So when he spoke, people listened. Because he had, as you said, literally walked the talk 7 times over.
And that piety, that foundation, it underpinned his legal education.
Precisely. He was a serious jurist. He belonged to the Maliki school of Islamic law, which is predominant across Western and Northern Africa.
Why is the Maliki school significant here? Does it lend itself more easily to this idea of coexistence?
It does, actually. Maliki jurisprudence is known historically for its practicality, for its greater willingness compared to some other schools to integrate regional customs and traditions.
That's called urf.
Yes, urf. As long as those customs don't violate core Islamic principles. And that flexibility made it uniquely suited to address the complexities of a place like West Africa, where you really needed a license to coexist.
Now, for the historians listening, we should mention that our sources point to a big scholarly debate over his exact dates.
A huge debate. Was it the 12th century, the 13th, or did he die closer to 1500, as the scholar Ivor Wilkes suggests?
It's a gap of centuries.
It is. But what's so fascinating is that whether we place him earlier or later, the core tenets of his movement and his legacy, that foundational text for coexistence, they remain absolutely constant. The idea is sound, regardless of the exact year it was written down.
Okay, so let's get into that philosophy. While other Muslim communities might have seen conquest as an obligation, Swari, he adopted what we have to call a highly strategic pacifist stance.
And we really need to nail down that term, strategic pacifism, because absolute pacifism is rare in Islamic history.
Right.
The Quran is clear that violence is permitted for self-defense, for protecting Islamic borders or communities. Swari was no different. He accepted that.
So what was the revolutionary move?
The revolutionary move was his explicit rejection of armed conflict for political imposition or for missionary purposes.
And this brings us back to the term jihad. We hear it applied exclusively to warfare today. But when Swari rejected armed jihad, was he rejecting all striving, or was he just reprioritizing?
He was absolutely reprioritizing. Jihad literally means struggle or striving. And the internal struggle, the greater struggle, jihad an-nafs.
The struggle against your own ego.
The struggle against your ego for moral perfection. That's traditionally considered the most important form. Swari emphasized that alongside, striving for charity, for education, striving to be a good neighbor. He essentially took armed conflict, the lesser jihad, off the table completely when dealing with non-Muslim neighbors.
Unless their very existence was threatened.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
Only for self-defense. So the clerical community he established, the Yaqan, they became synonymous with this stance. They were known for their strong disavowal of armed jihad as a means of change. He just saw war as counterproductive to the ultimate goal.
Completely counterproductive.
His whole philosophy was that conversion is a process, not some single event. And it's best served not by coercion, but by providing a visible, positive, living example of Islamic life.
Be a good person, a good neighbor.
Be trustworthy in trade, be good citizens. And he coupled this with a real institutional emphasis on learning. He wasn't just preaching. He undertook these peaceful missionary journeys to Senegal and the Gambia, and he focused on building structures.
Establishing madrasas, schools.
The whole educational system. And that commitment to education over force became a defining feature. Another was an almost total rejection of direct political involvement.
They stayed out of secular rule.
Completely. They focused inward on proper Islamic conduct and education rather than outward on seizing power. And that detachment gave them a kind of moral authority, no matter who is in charge of the state.
It sounds like a revolutionary social contract, really, designed for survival in this complex, multi-faith world. To make this practical, let's go through the 7 principles that really encapsulated Swari's position.
This is his operational roadmap. The first principle provides the critical pivot point. It states that kufur, or unbelief, it results from yal.
Ignorance.
Ignorance, not from inherent wickedness.
And that is a profound shift. It immediately turns the relationship from one of enemy versus believer into one of student versus teacher. It makes violence logically counterproductive.
Precisely. If someone is merely ignorant, you educate them, you don't kill them. The second and third principles then build on this patience. Number 2 says God's design dictates that some remain in jahiliyyah, a state of ignorance, longer than others.
And number 3?
Number 3 states that true conversion can only occur in God's own time, and that actively proselytizing, it actually risks interfering with his divine will.
Now hang on, that sounds like a tension. If conversion is entirely up to God's timing, why bother with missionary work at all?
It is a tension, and scholars do debate it, but it's highly unlikely Swari meant they should just sit idle. What he likely meant was a rejection of forced timing. You can't hasten God's will through violence. Your duty is to set the stage for conversion through education and example, and then you wait, which brings us right to the core of it.
Principle 4.
Jihad against unbelievers is unacceptable for conversion. Recourse to arms is permissible only in self-defense if the Muslim community's existence is threatened. That door to offensive war is slammed shut.
And then comes the principle that was so critical for West African political stability, Principle 5.
This one argues that Muslims may accept the authority of non-Muslim rulers and even support them, provided it allows Muslims to follow their own way of life.
According to the Sunnah of the Prophet.
Exactly, the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, which is the moral guide. So Swari is essentially saying that as long as the state, even a non-Muslim state, doesn't prevent you from being a practicing Muslim.
You have a theological license to coexist, not an obligation to revolt.
Precisely. This principle provided the theological scaffolding for centuries of political coexistence across West Africa. It prevented these perpetual cycles of war you saw elsewhere. It avoided that trap of declaring non-Muslim lands as Dar al-Harab, the abode of war.
Which many other scholars felt obligated to conquer.
It did. And the final 2 principles just reinforced the whole strategy. 6. Muslims must present a positive example to enable emulation. And 7, a deep commitment to education is necessary to keep the practice of the law free from error.
It's a comprehensive philosophy of patience, and it's rooted so deeply in that famous Quranic line, "There is no compulsion in religion."
Suwari just provided the legal and social framework to make that statement practical, even when you're living under foreign rule.
So his influence was massive. He was called the Sheikh of all, founded major clerical centers like Diakabambu. But the real test of this philosophy came much later, didn't it? In the turbulence of the 19th century.
That's right. How did this pacifist tradition fare when the French arrived and these huge internal conflicts erupted?
The 19th century was this moment of decision for West African Muslims. You have growing European encroachment on one side and these massive internal religious reform movements on the other. It created a dramatic split.
A huge philosophical split. On one side, you had figures like Al-Hajj Omar Tal,
A leader in the Tijaniya Sufi order.
who chose the militant option. He declared an armed jihad, created the massive Tukulur Empire, aiming to replace the existing rulers and push back the French.
And it was a high-stakes decision.
Extremely. His empire was built on violence, and ultimately, it was temporary. It caused immense destruction and was eventually crushed by the French military, leaving these deep societal scars.
And that stands in stark contrast to the path taken by scholars influenced by Suwari's Yakhan tradition.
Who strongly repudiated Tal's violent jihad. You can just see this deep chasm opening up. One path demanding immediate political dominance through force, the other advising patience and preservation through accommodation.
And this patient path found a powerful home in the Qadiri Sufi order.
Right, which became heavily influenced by the Suwarian tradition. The Qadiri leaders were significantly more likely to reject a violent response to the French. They preferred peaceful cooperation or negotiation as long as it safeguarded their community's ability to practice their faith.
This continuous line of thought leads us to maybe the most famous figure of West African resistance, Ahmad Bamba.
The founder of the Muridiya order in Senegal.
And he was initially a Qadiri member. He was soaking in that environment, which was already infused with Sorian ideas.
The connections are undeniable. Bamba's approach to resisting French colonialism perfectly mirrored Suwari's core principles. He preached a nonviolent jihad,
Defining the struggle not as a military conflict,
but as immense physical and scholarly work. He emphasized education, economic development, communal organization as the true means of social and political change.
a direct echo of Suwari's principles 6 and 7.
And, most critically, Bamba used the exact theological loophole from Suwari Principle 5, arguing it was permissible to submit to non-Muslim rule, in this case the French, as long as Muslims were allowed to practice their religion freely.
And that stance saved his community from destruction.
It allowed them to thrive peacefully, eventually gaining massive social and political influence in Senegal. It's an extraordinary legacy.
It is. Suwari and Bamba, they represent this powerful, continuous, and highly influential tradition of intellectual and strategic pacifism in West Africa. That tradition, rooted centuries ago in Mali, is a foundational reason why a place like Senegal today is marked by such a harmonious relationship between the secular state and its deeply religious society.
West Africa really is a crucial region for this. It provides an entirely different model for religious and political success in the Islamic world. One focused on stability, education, and social excellence, not on military imposition.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this? Suwari's tradition strongly emphasized that true conversion can only happen in God's time. It places patience at the absolute center of the mission.
Right.
So if we accept that premise, that success in spreading an idea or a faith is measured not by immediate political wins, but by the long-term quality of education, of positive example, of centuries of quiet, patient striving. What radical shift does that philosophy imply about the very nature of human striving itself?
If the struggle is truly internal and academic and exemplary, then the pace of change becomes almost irrelevant, doesn't it? It suggests that the quality of your struggle is ultimately more important than the immediate outcome you achieve.
A profound thought on the investment of time and patience. Something for you to mull over. We'll see you next time.